Hey guys, Noodle here. So today I'm going to show you how I actually go about making futuristic structures in Blender. It's going to be a bit more in depth than my last tutorial. I broke down my process for creating an entire sci-fi scene, and this time I'm just going to be focusing on the modeling slash texturing process. This tutorial is going to be a bit longer, so grab some coffee, water, tea, whatever you need, and let's get into creating some sci-fi structures. Okay, so here in Blender I've just opened up to a basic scene, deleted everything from the scene, and I just want to begin by placing down a cube. I usually start with that for building shapes. It's very good to kind of follow a primitive shape style unless you have something grander in mind. I just like to start with a cube, and then I also like to lift it up right here. If you hold down Control, you can move it along increments like this. I like to move it right up against there and set the origin to the 3D cursor. That way it's just always on the ground and it's a lot easier to work with. So let me see, for this shape I'm thinking maybe I kind of did a sword-like shape, a dagger-like shape previously, but I might try out something a little different with this one. So let's see. I could raise it up, and it's really just something where you just kind of mess around and see what kind of you can do with it. So maybe I'll do something like this, scale it down a little bit, bring it up like that. Just moving along the Z-axis to make everything kind of balanced. And yeah, there we go. So I also want to put some antennas on top. That's something I'm going to get to a bit later, but first I'm just going to start by creating some extra detail. And okay, that looks pretty good. Let me see. Next, I kind of want to make something a little bit more interesting to the shape rather than just a basic cube. So what I might do is make another cube, move it to here, and then I'm going to bring it up. Wrong face. Bring it up and maybe just do something like this so that I can select there, move it along the x-axis, and kind of create this thing. So it's sort of like a missile. Like imagine if it was around 4 sides, you know, I could easily create something like that. Maybe bring it up to above. Yeah, I really like that. Okay. So now something I really like to do is you can use the spin tool, but a lot of the times it's easier just to remember the numbers. So 180, which is once around. It's not 360. 360 is a full circle around. If I do 360, it'll end up right where it began. A lot of people do that accidentally, but then I basically just move it along 180 degrees, which spins it around to the other side, duplicate it again, and then turn it 90 to a right angle. And right off the bat, there I see those faces are a bit too close. Not too happy with that, so what I can do is I'm actually going to reset, select this back face. Let me make sure I'm selecting all the faces. You can go into isolate mode with the backslash tool, or forward slash actually. And yeah, okay, now I know that I have both faces selected, because if I only selected this one, what would really be happening is I'd be moving this in, not what I necessarily want to do. I want to keep that as cubic as possible, especially for UV unwrapping. When you get to more complex shapes, that can become a real big headache, so not something you want to do. And right here I can hit Control B and bevel that down. Also, if it has a weird kind of bevel, for example, let me see, right along here maybe. Well, it's hard to say. This is kind of well scaled, but if something is scaled wrong, you can just go Control A, rotation and scale, and then your bevel will turn out just fine and won't have any problems. So let's see, right like that. All right, looks pretty good. Now I'm just going to move it along the 180 and then along the 90. And right there, I think we have a pretty cool shape. It kind of looks like a missile buried into the ground. It just evokes kind of a strong feeling, which I really tend to like. So right here, I'm also going to scale this down a bit along the Z-axis. Okay, I'm still oriented around the 3D cursor. You can hold down period and switch it to the medium point, which is a lot better. And then I think I'll put the, I'll inset and then I'll just bring this down, and that's where my antennas are going to come out the top. Just to add a little bit of tertiary details, I talked about that in my last video on creating a sci-fi scene. That's going to be really important to develop 3 layers of details. So right now I'm kind of working on the primary details, just the essential form in its most cubic, basic state. This is where you use mostly primitive shapes and you follow a really simple design theory. So I just created that little indent. That's sort of my secondary details being added on, so that I'll have somewhere to actually put the antennas and the more interesting third or secondary details. Okay, so let's see. I also brought this in so that I could select these outside faces right here and basically just bring in another bevel. Just again, adding more interest to the shape, trying to make it a little bit more complex, make something kind of interesting to it. And along here, I'm thinking I'm going to add window ridges. Now, I could go in and actually, oh, I triangulate it. I could just do this and then extrude, but to be quite honest, it ends up kind of complexifying the shape when I don't have to, and I tend to like to use other geometry. Most of the time I'm relying on textures to handle most of this, and with large buildings I find that you don't need a very congealed one-off form because at the end of the day, a structure this large would be made of many different pieces, so I kind of follow that design theory, and I try to follow the design theory really based on the shape. So let's see, let's add a plane, scale it up, bring it here, and kind of decide how thick our window ridges should be. Okay, I think that's going to be good. Now, what I want to do is essentially first add a Solidify modifier, and then bring that thickness up. You can also apply the rotation and scale, and that'll kind of make sure that's measured right. Okay, and then bring that size down just so the window ridges aren't too big. And then I want to make sure that it's kind of giving some room down here for this detail. I don't necessarily want to lose that. I kind of want to have the shape still readable. But basically I'm just going to create the shape like that. Create a good size window ridge. Make sure it's not too uneven or anything. And yeah, I think I'll keep it like that for a second. And the second thing I want to do is add an array modifier. First it's going to move along the x-axis, but we actually want it to move upward a little bit. About 2 might be cool, but I like to keep that usually uneven, so either 2.5 or even going shorter, more like 1.5 is always a good move. I find that just doing even, it just tends to be a little bit simplistic and almost create a ribbed look. And while we are going for that look somewhat, I want to create a sort of natural geometry to it. I don't want it to be too obvious in its measurements. So I'm just going to make it 2.5. I think that'll look pretty good. And the reason I put the array modifier below the solidify modifier, there's actually a reason for that, is because first I want it to be solidified and then move along an array at the thickness of the solidify. So if I brought this up right above it, you'll see it's actually not doing anything because the solidify modifier is applied after, and a plane is infinitely thin. So if it's arrayed upwards, it kind of can't add, it's like multiplying onto 0. You can't really add more or less to 0 because there is no thickness to it. It's kind of not based on the real world. It's not like a piece of paper with a really thin nature. It's actually truthfully 100% flat. So I make sure to bring that array modifier below so I have some thickness first so it'll actually go and stack correctly. Alright, so let's see. Let's make sure that this array is counted all the way up. And now, before I can move forward on beveling the actual shape, or actually I'll show a trick. You can actually bevel while keeping the solidify. If you notice, you'll hit B and Control B, and you actually won't be able to bevel it. It'll just move inward without actually moving inward. So what you want to do is you want to select all the vertices, then hit Control B, and you'll notice it doesn't pull in, but you click up here and switch from edges to vertices. And there you go. And right away you can see what that does. So let me see, do I want this inside or outside? It's kind of a hard decision. I might keep it actually thinner, and but I won't have it fully set inside. I think it actually, well, you know what? I'm actually going to keep it this way. I really actually am starting to like that. So I think I'll keep the shape that way, but I could also move out to here. It's really all up to you on how you want to make your building, and really just take away from this sort of the design theory I'm going with. I'm not necessarily trying to be perfect in my movements or, you know, have this specific thing in mind. I'm really just playing around with the shapes and kind of seeing what's interesting. So I think I'm pretty happy with that, but I also want to add window ridges to this. So once again, I'm going to delete the other 3. I'm not going to need them for now. And I'm going to actually go and, or you know what, I'm actually going to do it the same way as this and not really add any complexity to the shape right away. I'm just going to layer a shape on top. Again, we're building in pieces, in chunks, and that's going to work perfect for this. That's not really going to be a problem for us, and that shouldn't really cause any problems at all. I mean, you know, building in separated pieces with the texturing and the method that we're using, it's really not going to affect anything too poorly. So let's see, I'm going to bring that up, and I'm going to scale it right down to the width and the length of this. Sometimes I like to go above because you can make the shape more measured and equal. So there, I'm trying to create the distance between here and here equally. So let's see. And also maybe match the window ridges over here. So let's see. Yeah, that's not really going to work. We're going to want that a little bit thicker. And then X. Let me make sure that's even. All right, there we go. And let's see. Oh, you know what? Actually, and again, this is a part of designing this, you know, you come up with new ideas and you end up just going for them. So let's see. I might actually do this one method where I'm going to scale it, inset it right along here, and then bring that in. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'm going to like that a lot better because I actually am going to follow something I did in another piece. I called that beacons, the other piece, and I use these windows at the bottom of the structure. You can see right down there. So yeah, I think I'm going to do that again on this structure. And yeah, once again, I'm going to delete all those just because I already added more detail, and it's only going to take a second to re-add it. Again, you can use the spin modifier, but a lot of the times I find that just adds complexity when you don't need it, when it's easier just to do that like that. You can also do linked objects, but I also found that slows down the render. And sometimes I like to create an asymmetry, and it can be a bit difficult to get them unparented and doing their own thing. So I kind of like to just duplicate it. It only takes a second to delete these and re-spin it around, especially when I'm only dealing with 4. It's when I start to deal with more that starts to get a little complex. You know, if I did this, that could be a bit of a headache, but for this, I think we're going to be fine. Just doing that amount. Okay, let me make sure these aren't doubled. Okay, cool. Now let's see. I also like to make sure I add a base to the building. Without that, it might end up just kind of being a bit of a weak silhouette. Much like the roots in a tree, your building's really going to need a strong foundation. It's not just going to poke out of the ground. Now, while some skyscrapers in reality might do this, I tend to like to try to create a more strong, powerful sort of base, even when I have something that's so top heavy, you know, and especially. So I'm just going to add another simple shape. And again, all we've been working with is cubes. I'm again going to move that right up to the 3D cursor, holding down control to move it along increments. And yeah, I'm just going to thin this out. Let's see. Bring that out. And then once again, I'm going to bevel it. This time I'm not going to use, what's it called? I'm not going to use the, well, bit of a blank there. I'm not sure. I think I'm just going to, or the Solidify modifier. And that's not because I want to actually not have it really layered outward. I just want one shape, and I really want it around the center point, because if I were to do the Solidify modifier along a plane, then I have to bring it out on equal sides, mirror it, and then solidify it. That can tend to be more work, and sometimes it's just easier just to work with a plain old cube. So I think that's what I'm going to do. So yeah, we added this base, but now if we were to do this, it's just a little too weak for me. So what I might actually do is bring it out to here, find where I kind of want it placed, have this outward one selected, and mirror it around that object. So now I have 3, and I wanted these equally distant apart. I like to keep things mathematically sort of centered and measured correctly. It allows for more tools to work better for you, you know, when you start to lose and freehand things, it can get a little wonky, and you start to lose your like coplanar faces and, you know, little things that you're actually going to want throughout the building process. So let me see. I'm going to select all of these, and again, as I said, coplanar. I'm going to select similar coplanar. You can hit the space bar to search and essentially just bring them out like that. And I'm going to bring them up like this. Great. So it sort of has these grills at the bottom. It just creates a more powerful shape, and I'm really liking that. So yeah, I honestly think I'm just going to add a few more details, and then I'm honestly going to call this finished on the modeling end, and then we can move into texturing. Okay, so let's just add some antennas real quick. So first I'm going to set the origin to here, because I automatically know that I'm going to want some shapes, and to just spawn right there. And let's see, first I'm going to do this. I'm going to bring these up. I'm going to start by designing my first antenna. Maybe perhaps something strong that kind of indicates some sort of power to it. you know, something that's a little bit more blade-like. As I said, I really like kind of blade designs to buildings and things on buildings because I just find that it gets a very strong feeling getting along the piece. And yeah, really cool. Right there, sort of a spire. Perhaps scale it up, scale it down along the z-axis. And yeah, cool. I'm not a big fan of this shape right here. So actually, let me start one more time. Again, that's how it's going to go with this. You're going to add a shape, you're going to unadd a shape. This is just off the top of my head what I'm building here. Didn't even pull up references because after a while, you start to make buildings and you just start to build up a catalog of the kind of shapes that you like making. So just make a ton of buildings and you're just going to find yourself making certain shapes and doing certain things that you really enjoy. And that's really the process. You know, you want to create stuff that sort of calls to you. So let's see. I'm going to set a face right here. And I'm going to set the cursor to here, Shift S once again. And then, okay. Scale right along here to flatten it out. And we're good to go. Alright, so now that I added this little edge down here, I'm basically just going to move it up to the 3D cursor, scale along the Z-axis, and flatten it out. And the reason I want to do that is I want to join these 2 points and be able to add straight loop cuts all the way up. So I'm going to add one here, one down here, and just scale along everything but the Z-axis. You can do that by hitting Shift-Z. I'll make sure to go back to medium point. ES, Shift-Z. So I'm extruding, scaling, and then scaling only along the X and Y axis and not the Z axis. You can do that by hitting Shift-Z. And that'll ensure that you only scale along these 2 axes. This is great for being able to move a point only along one axis so you can kind of slot things rather than go into these side views and have to do it that way. That's a great tool that you're going to find yourself using quite a bit. Okay, let's see. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that shape. Now I just want to add some smaller antennas around it. And for these, I really don't want to add a ton of detail. It's probably just going to be better just to add, you know, small cubes, things that are going to accentuate that main shape. Nothing too complex. Let's see. I like to follow the 3 rule, which is basically I do one that's kind of second in height and then third. It's like first, second, and third place. I find that that tends to get the best sort of, you know, distribution of shapes and kind of gives off the most appeal. So that's something I'm going to follow here. So I added a loop cut right here. And rather than add another loop cut and then measure it out, I find that sometimes it's easier just to bevel. And if you're beveling along all flat faces, it won't actually make this kind of cornered edge. It'll just segment it into 2 loop cuts, which can be a lot easier because if I were to just add 2 loop cuts, they would just sort of distribute like this, and then I have to scale them. And sometimes it's easier just to place exactly where you want the center of the shape and then bevel it. So that's something I like to do occasionally, especially in more complex situations. A lot of these tools I'm showing you aren't necessarily important for something so simple, but when you get to more complex shapes, a lot of these tools will really come in handy for you. Oh, look at that. Something happened there. Move it up there. Yeah, Shift-C. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to turn this into sort of a glowing light. I'm also going to add some corner lights to this. I'm going to show you how to do that in just a moment, but before I do that, I'm just going to bring one more over. And if you notice, if they're equal, they sort of have a strangeness to the shape. Also, I'm going to make sure that this is equally distant from this shape. So I'm going to move it around the 3D cursor, duplicate it, and then just move it 180. Once again, equally done. You know, they're right along the same distance from the center. It just looks nicer. But with 2 even ones, personally, I just don't like when things are too even like this. So what I like to do is just take the second one, move into wireframe mode so I can select all this top area, and then just move this one down. You know, as I said, the first, second, third place sort of rule. It's like the rule of 3s. It just creates a nicer silhouette, makes your building a little bit more complex. And then just to add some more visual interest, I'll add 2 more, and once again, kind of create a 4th and a 5th place, so to say, and just move these down to different heights. So maybe one right in between, and then maybe one that's at our lowest. And there we go. We have some interesting shapes there that sort of establish this tower. Might also bring that one down. Don't necessarily like that it's right in between these 2. It's a little too close to the other 2 in height. So maybe just do it like that. And yeah, okay, I'm really liking this, and I think I'm going to call it complete on the modeling. You can always go in and add more detail. Oh, maybe one more thing. As I said, you can always mess with it. One more thing, just gonna bevel that a little bit. And yeah, just call it there, because, you know, sometimes simpler is better. Sometimes letting off of the modeling with a building like this just makes for a better, you know, sort of silhouette, and relying on the textures to actually take this further. I found with bigger buildings, I used to add too much detail. I'll put up a piece right now I did a while ago. Just a little bit too much detail put into modeling actually creates disruptions in the dispersion of detail. And with something like a building that we want to render out quickly, it's just better just to rely on textures with something so big. You know, worrying about the micro details, it's just going to clog up your render. It's just going to take way more time than it needs to. And sometimes it's just easier just to rely on textures, especially since we're using JSplacement. Amazing app for texturing buildings. And I like to let the textures do a lot of heavy lifting. Makes my life easier, makes the renders turn out better. And at the end of the day, it's just easier just to make a simple model and rely on the textures. So take my word for it, makes your life a lot easier. And now we can move on to texturing. Okay, so I went and downloaded some textures off of textures.com, and I also found some free image resources off of Pixabay, specifically for the actual lights that are going to go in between these ridges right here. So I'm just going to bring some of those textures in, and as I apply them, I'll actually begin UV unwrapping, because when you're dealing with shapes this simple, sometimes it's easier just to slap them on and then determine how you're actually going to go and unwrap the shape afterwards. So let's go ahead and bring in some of the textures. Didn't mean to go into wireframe there. Okay, and the first one I'm going to start off with is a JSplacement texture. I actually created for another video for the large sci-fi tower video. You can go check that out right there. I actually go into this software a bit more, but let me know if you'd want an actual in-depth tutorial for this, and I can get that together. But I'm still relatively new to the software, and I found just tweaking around can do a lot. So I'm just going to bring that texture and I create it. Okay, so let's see. I have it right here, JSplacement texture, and then I can actually go about UV unwrapping it. So I'm going to apply it to every shape that I actually want to. I'm going to combine these shapes. Sometimes or actually I'm going to delete these because I know how I'm going to circle them around, and I know that I'm going to want to unwrap one set and then reduplicate. Sometimes that can be easier when you have repeating assets to just delete the other ones or create an object data link. Another thing I can also teach in another tutorial. But for the moment, I'm just going to delete it, and then I'll bring it back in. Okay, so let me name this material Sci-Fi Panels, and then I'll just bring them onto every single shape that I want them on. So I want them on that, and I want them there, and there. And again, with this detail, I'm just going to first UV unwrap it, and then I'll re-add all those details. For these, I'm actually going to do a simpler texture, but I'm going to go into that when I get there. So let's see. First thing I want to do is hit Control A, rotation and scale, and apply that to these shapes. And a lot of the times I find just taking the shape and following a simple cube projection tends to do a very good job for me. So I ended up with this textures being straight, being even, and usually that's a lot easier than actually going in and manually adding my own seams, which can take, you know, a good amount of time adding seams and messing around and then having to see where it's stretching or not. Sometimes it's easier just to go ahead and use the cube projection, especially when you're obviously working with cubes. I find cylinder projection works a little less effectively. Same with sphere projection, but cube projection I find usually works great. So now that we have this applied, let's do it to some of the other shapes. Let's see. So this is actually the time that we need to start applying our Solidify modifiers, because as you can see, it's just stretching along this shape because currently there's actually no geometry there. So it just stretches the texture out. So I'm going to actually go in, get out of edit mode, and hit apply to the Solidify. And now I'm going to keep my array on because I want that detailing to match. And then I can again apply my rotation and scale and unwrap with cube projection. Now I can see that the texture is a little unscaled against this one, and I'm definitely going to want to fix that. So, did not mean to do that. And there we go. Alright, sometimes you'll have some window problems, but that's no big deal. It's an easy fix. If you just grab onto these corners, you can close out windows, reopen them, and you know, you'll get used to it. It's a very difficult tool to use, but sure many of you have had trouble with that one, and Lord knows I still do. So let's see. I'm going to scale this up until it's even with that. Now this is not the scale that I want any of the textures to be. I just want to make sure that they're relatively even so that when I do actually scale them down, I'll do it all at once so they'll be nice and even. Okay. And especially with textures like this, I find that they don't need to necessarily be super on point. As long as they're straight against the edges, it should be giving you a very good result. And again with this, I'm going to apply the rotation and scale, select it all, and cube project. And let's see. Okay, that scale actually seems to be pretty good. Now let's see. I'm going to bring in my next texture, which is going to be a high-rise texture for right along here. I kind of figured, you know, this big open gap, I'm not going to do the details myself. I'd rather honestly rely entirely on a texture for this. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into my materials panel and add another texture, hitting assign, new, and then I'm going to call this high-rise windows. Okay, so let's just open it up, put on an image texture, and let's see, where did I save that? Right here. And again, our scale is off, but in this case, I'm actually not going to use a node setup to scale it like I will for the other textures. For this, I'd rather just bring it down because honestly, sometimes it's easier just to go ahead and scale on this actual map. It makes your life a lot easier. And then I'm going to stretch it out there and stretch it upward till I find the amount I like. First, let me bring it down here to this bottom edge, and then I'm going to bring that up until it feels about even. So right about there. You don't have to, again, you don't have to be perfect with this. This is good for, you know, a good distance away from the building to actually go and see that. And at the moment, you can tell that this texture is really not that good looking, but that's not exactly what we're going to use it for. This is not going to go into the albedo. It's actually going to act more on our roughness and normal functions. So I'm going to show you in just a second how to do that. Okay, so I have this applied here. And now let's just finish up by adding the materials to this. And also adding some of the small dot lights, which I skipped in the modeling section, but this applies more so to materials as you kind of have to do the materials at the same time. So I'm going to show you a trick for this right here. I'm going to select these 4 points. I'm going to duplicate them. Make sure I right click to set them right back to their point, and then hit P, separate by selection. And this is just going to separate this from the P. So I duplicated it so I still have that mesh, but I've created another one. And it's right there, right where I need it. I'm also going to reset my point to medium point so it's nice and in point. And so I put it right into the point, and let's see. I'm going to put onto it a skin modifier, and that's going to create a loop, so that's not what we want actually. So I'll unview it and I'll do this and then hit only edges and faces. So now we're just left with 4 points, which is exactly what we want, because now with the skin modifier on, it'll create these 4 dots, but those might be a bit too big for us, so we're going to make sure they're all selected. And when you're in skin modifier, scaling is only going to scale the vertices relative to each other or relative to what they're being scaled towards or themselves. So what we actually want to do when we're dealing with the skin modifier is hit Control A, and then we can scale in and out, which is different than scaling the actual shapes because this is a modifier. Once we apply, we'll be able to scale it normally, but while it's still in skin modifier, we need to use Control A. So I'll scale it down to right about there. And these are going to act as our beacon lights. So I guess I'll start right there by adding an emission shader, changing that color to more of a red. Most people go all the way red, but I find kind of a more light red tends to work. I also like to add a little bit of orange. It almost adds a natural LED fringe that you find that LEDs have. And then I like to up the light to about 5. Not too strong so it's overly influential on everything, but just strong enough where it's looking good. So I'm going to scale that down. And currently at the moment that might be a bit too dim. 10. Okay, I guess I'll go higher actually to 20 because I kind of like that white heat to it. Kind of creates a better interest. And you can tell this is already starting to look great with those lights. Those sort of details are really going to help accentuate your building and help the scale feel correct, because details need to be scaled according to the scale of the object itself. As I said in the other tutorial where I showed how to make a large sci-fi tower, and I went down onto a full breakdown, again, linked below, and I essentially was talking about how details matter relative to the object that they're on. Something large will be made of very small pieces, and something very small will be made of large pieces. For example, if you look at a speedboat, there's essentially large chunks and pieces that form the whole shape, very solid, large, congealed parts. But if you look at something like a cargo ship, it's made of many plates and small pieces and little ridges, and the details become countless on a large shape. So relying on these little highlight points to really nail in that idea that this is very large and the details on it are very small relative to it. So that's something I like to keep in mind. Adding a lot of things like that is really just going to bring your renders to a better place. Now let's see. I'm going to want to create for these. Honestly, I'm just going to take these and I'm going to switch to individual origins and scale them so that they're quite thin. And then I'm going to select all these top faces. And I don't want these to be tall rectangles like that. I want them to be simple squares. And I'll do that. So now they have a much thinner appearance. But the reason that I'm going to do this, also, I'm going to add one more little detail. No, I said I was done with modeling, but that's how this sort of goes. You start to texture, you start to mess around, and then you find that you actually want to change things. So I want to add something like that, just to add some variation. Maybe one more here. And that's just sort of going to break up the shapes, just sort of make them more interesting, make it feel more large. Again, these small details, they really add up when you're dealing with something like this. So I'm going to select here. It's kind of hard to reach, but see, sometimes it's hard to select. Right there, there, and on top. And again, for the rest of these shapes, I'm going to select all 4, so I'm good. New feature actually added to Blender, probably around 2.8, is actually being able to select multiple objects and go into edit mode. Now you can't merge the separated objects' faces together, but being able to enter edit mode on a few objects rather than just one at a time has been a huge addition to the entire piece of software, and I can't even tell you how much I've used it and how much I missed it even before it was a feature. It was something that I was always wondering, like, why can't they do it even if it doesn't let you link objects? I can understand why some functionality can't happen in multiple object edit mode, but for it just not to be there didn't make a lot of sense. So it's really nice to see, and honestly, to see a lot of the changes that have happened to Blender in the past little while has been really amazing, and just something I'm really happy about. So let's see, but I digress. So I just made a basic tower material before adding the red material, because I just want to make sure that the whole thing has that applied before I assign this selection. So I'm going to go into material preview, and let's see, let me hit assign again. Okay, so it seems that I need to have each one of these. Let me make sure that these all have the tower material. Again, functionality missing from the multiple edit mode selections. That makes total sense. Only being able to select one item at a time is going to allow you to assign materials, because this could have a different material set than this, and for assign to work that way, it just wouldn't make a lot of sense. So it's not fully there with the edit mode multi-functionality, so sometimes you're just going to have to individually go into edit mode and do this manually, but that's no big deal, and it makes total sense why that's not really a possibility. But there we go. So we have some beacons, and already we can see that's really adding some mood, some ambience, and those little micro details that are really going to add up. Okay, so now I can actually start working on some of the materials of the tower itself, of the building itself. And I think the first one I'm going to mess with is these high-rise windows right here. So again, I'm going to go and add some more detail just to help accentuate the shapes. And I might bevel right there. No, I'm not really liking what it's doing up there, and I could go in and fix that, but at the end of the day, I'm going to like that it's inset. So let me go down to my shader editor. And sometimes you can go and hit X on or change this, but what will happen is, you notice, is it gets rid of your image. And sometimes it's a pain to have to go and reopen the window again. So I like to just go directly into shader editor, delete my principled, and add an emission. That's just so I don't have to rebring in my texture. Sometimes it's easier just to do it that way. So here in rendered view, we can start to see that's starting to give off an emission, but it's quite weak at the moment. So let me jump it to 2, maybe 5. Okay, cool. So this is not going to match with the color that I'm actually going to decide to add for the other windows. So at the moment, I'm going to actually go and change that. So there's one way that I like to do this, and there is different ways to do this, like a hue shift value and other things, but there's mostly one homogeneous color. So I might switch it to grayscale using a color ramp node. And then on this white node, you can notice I can actually change the overall color. And a lot of the time I like to do that just because when the texture isn't homogeneous and I want it to be, it's probably the easiest way to do it quickly. And I know that I'm also going to have the ridges in between here also have that texture, so it's going to, or that color. So it's a little bit easier just to use a color ramp and isolate it to one color rather than tweak with the image too much, which also can slow down your render quite a bit. So, you know, overloading with nodes, you know, adding a hue and a shift, a brightness and a contrast. Sometimes it's easier just to go in and, you know, add a color ramp node where I can raise and lower the brightness. And actually, speaking of which, I like that actually more contrasty like that. Gives off quite a bit of a stronger silhouette. So yeah, so I'm really happy with that. And now I can actually go center this around the 3D cursor and rotate it around once again because I'm actually happy with the UV unwrapping and the texturing on that. And as you can see, now this building's looking a lot stronger. Let me add in a lamp so you can actually, sun lamp, so you can actually see what's going on a little bit. Let's see. Wait, I'm just going to bring it up along the Z. Sometimes I like to do this just so I kind of know where it's pointing towards my subject. And let me bring it along a 45. Yeah, and so that's starting to look pretty strong. It's starting to give off a really powerful silhouette, and I'm really kind of liking where it's going. So let's continue along, and now we're going to add the little windows in between here before we actually go in and fix the plating on this. So I showed this technique in the other video as well, again linked below, how to make a sci-fi scene, so to say. This is more of a comprehensive breakdown about actually making buildings themselves. That video goes into the entire assembly of a scene from, you know, modeling, texturing, concepting, you know, all the way down to compositing and rendering. So definitely go check that out if you want a more comprehensive look on how to make a full, complete scene. But for this tutorial, I'm really just going to go into the building specifically and all the micro details of it. Okay, so let's see. Oh yeah, I also have to UV unwrap that before I continue. And there we go. And the scale is once again messed up, but you can actually see what the details are going to look like when they're scaled down. So it's a good little look at it. But I'm going to bring this up so it matches in detail scale. Right around there. I'm not being too exact. Sometimes it's easier just to eyeball it and leave it there. Like right here, I might bring this down a little bit, and then yeah, we'll be good. Okay, so let me see. Now I'm going to add the window ridges right here. Sorry for getting a little sidetracked there. And I'm going to keep this collection as is. Take this. I like to make another one called Scene. It's usually where I put my lamps and things so I can move those if I just need to focus in on the object themselves. So I'm going to minimize these out. Create a new collection. Scene collection, new collection. And I'm going to call this Window Lights. Again, I showed this how to do this in the other tutorial, but once again, I'm going to show how to make these windows a little bit more in depth. So I'm going to use the add-on Images as Planes. If you need to find that, go to Preferences, Add-ons, Images as Planes, and you can just check that right there, and you'll be able to do that easily. So you can go up to File, Import Images as Planes. By the way, this is an add-on that you're going to want to save into your preferences. It's just super useful, and it's one of those things. And I grabbed it right here. I called it Lights. And at first, this texture might seem totally off for this. I mean, what would I use this for, the background or something different? Well, actually, we're going to make the window ridges out of this texture. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to go into the one view, in the front view. And I'm going to actually go and isolate this. And I'm going to isolate this little section right down here, right where the water meets the the buildings, and I find this little dots of lights, and the natural breakup of the texture, that really natural element, really reflects in the final render. So I like to use image textures as much as possible rather than using built-in noise and stuff. Obviously, there's reasons to do one or the other, but a lot of the times it's sort of better just to use image textures because of that chaos, because of that natural dispersion of detail. So it's something I rely on greatly, and you know, I find that image textures are easier a lot of the time. A lot of the time they give you that chaos that you just really can't lose, and you know. Let's see, so I separated those and I can hit buy loose parts, and I like to break these up so that I can actually split them up into pieces, so I can take them as is. And let us see. So what I want to do, I need to straighten this out. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to set their origins to their geometry so that they each have their own nice origin. Select them all, selection to cursor, individual origin, selection to cursor. Okay, that doesn't seem to work, but selection to cursor, lift it up. And I split these up into pieces so I can actually go and line them up with the window ridges. And the reason that I'm doing multiple is that I'm actually going to want to split them between the windows so we have a bit of chaos added to it, but then go in and array that upward. So that's going to be a little bit of tweaking and measuring, but ultimately I'm going to end up with a natural chaos that breaks up the repetition, and it really doesn't require that much more computer space. So I find that this is kind of the easiest way to go about it. So before I go in and actually make that happen, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the shader editor, and instead of using a principled BSDF, I am going to use an emission and transparent node right there. And the reason I want to use these two is because I want it to be emissive and then transparent wherever it's too dark. Now if I do a mix shader, it's going to be kind of hard to separate those maps. I would have to create a mask. But when you're dealing with trying to subtract the dark, the easiest thing to do is an add shader, which means that wherever this is light, it will add to the transparent, or it'll take away from the transparent and focus on the emission. But wherever it's dark, the transparent will take over. That's super important just to get this texture really right and nailed in. And once again, to control the color, I'm going to open up the color ramp node. And then right here, I can, let's see, I'm going to have to copy the hex from the building itself. So if I go here and I actually take this color, since I can't use the eyedropper tool among two materials, I can just copy that, Control C, go back over to my window lights, and paste that into the hex. And a hex actually works across all software. So if you were to type this code into the hex on the color, in the color wheel in Photoshop or After Effects or really any other software, that color will be the same. So these are super useful. It's basically a code that all color kind of follows on computers, and it's an easy way to save your colors permanently. You need an exact color for a brand or for a certain item. That's the way you save it, through a hex. I don't know if it has different names in different softwares, but in Blender, it's hex. Okay, so there we go. We have that same blue. And once again, I might brighten this one up, actually. And I can do that by actually taking away some saturation, and then bringing this down, and then bringing this up. And this time, I actually want the strength to be quite a bit higher, so it has a nice glow on it. And there we go. We basically have a bunch of window selections that we can now take onto our building. And let's see, let me make sure. You can actually right click and select the objects of an entire collection. It makes your life a lot easier. And I want to scale those up along the medium point so that I find the actual size that I want. Let's see. Yep, and then I'm going to scale down along this. Shouldn't cause too much of a problem with the stretching, but we'll see. So now that I can see these window ridges in wireframe mode, I can actually go and disperse these equally among them. And you're going to see why we do this first, because it's going to be a lot easier to actually go. Let me also, so I don't miss them, bring them over to here. And then I can basically just, oh, I don't want to do that because of the vertical alignment. And I want to bring them in between each window before I array, rather than just use one piece and array it upwards, because I'm going to get that natural chaos, that natural dispersion of details. And you can use repetition, but the more sparingly you use it, the more equalized your model will feel. So let's see, let's line these up. 1, 3, and then I want to bring them right out to where the window is. And you'll see, okay, let me also bring these in. You'll see we actually have some nice window details. Okay, so let's see, we're going to have to tweak some stuff. So for one, we're going to want to bring this black value up, bring this blue value back. And yes, that's already starting to look really strong. Maybe bring the strength down to 2.5. Okay, so that's looking really cool. And let's see. We're going to bring that down. And then, you know what, actually, it might just be faster just to manually bring these up and do that manually. And then we'll apply them all as one shape. Okay, and then one more. And we're good to go. So now you can see the building has a really nice window texture on it. And the details are starting to split up. The colors are looking really nice. I can tweak this color over here, copy the hex onto the main windows. But I'm really looking happy with how that's looking. So now all I have to do is take this detail. And I'm going to make sure I select one, Control J, circle it around the 3D cursor, and I can actually go and spin it around each side. RZ90, and then RZ180. And now it's on every side of the building, equally dispersed, and we have a completed building there. And let me actually put on a denoise modifier so you can actually see this a little bit clearer. And now all we really have to do is apply this plate material the correct way, and this will come out looking great. So before I do that, I've already UV unwrapped this the way I want it, and I'm going to actually go around and make sure it's matched. Okay, cool. So now we just have to apply this plates material, adjust it the way we need it, and we can call this done. Before I do that, actually, let me make sure that this is all good to go. So I want to bring this gray material down, and it's a hex we're going to copy so that we can actually go, and I can even do this, 0.25, find the exact gray I want, and then that's actually going to go on the main material. So let me actually bring that up to 4. 4 will be good. So, and that'll match here too as well. So we're going to have the right gray across the entire thing. And let's just start messing with the Sci-Fi panels material. So the first thing I want to do is I'm actually going to take this off of the base color, because the base color we're actually going to leave alone. And I'm going to use this just on the roughness to begin with. So let's see, we're going to bring it there. And what you'll see happens is automatically, hold on one moment, there's going to be a sheen on this model. So if I actually bring this strength up, we can start to see what's going on. And at the moment, it doesn't seem to be doing too much. So let's bring this down for one. And then you can start to see the roughness actually gets adjusted by the, up here you can see it really well. The roughness, see, in some places it looks like a mirror, some places it looks really rough. You know, it has this sort of sheen in some places, but it's rough in other areas. And that's because we really need to dial this texture in a little bit. So color ramp, and then I'm going to, let's see, which affects the mirror. So, yep, that's what adjusts the roughness, and that's what adjusts, or this is the roughness, lower that is the glossier, black is glossy, white is rough, basically. Sorry, got a little tongue-tied there. Let's see, so I don't want it to be that reflective really anywhere, so I'm going to bring that up until I'm pretty happy. It has a nice sheen. Let's see. It's still a bit too reflective for me, so I might bring that up to right about here. And I'm also going to bring the white down because I don't want anything to be too rough. Just make this nice and faint, you know, nothing too crazy. And that sort of dispersion of roughness is what's going to create that natural pattern, making it appear that it's made out of several different materials. Okay, so let's see. Yep, that's looking really good. It's a really subtle effect, but it really adds up on the material. But now we also have the material being too smooth. The material itself actually doesn't have any depth or interest and doesn't appear to be made of different plates. So I'm going to bring this down, and I'm going to add a bump node. And what I'm going to do with this is keep it the same, and I'm going to bring in another color ramp node for it and bring it into height. and we're going to see what that does. So drag that to your normal, and now you'll see, boom, it's a little too strong. It's definitely way too strong. It's you'll even see here, and you can almost tell that it's a texture. It's just a little too potent, a little too powerful. So what we'll actually do is tone this down quite a bit, and oh, there we go. That's getting unselected, and I might dial this down to like 0.2, and that's just going to be a really subtle effect. That's just going to help define the material with some shape and some definition, and really kind of help sell that this is, you know, a sort of refined, strong shape. And then this, because of the way the colors are turning out, I'm going to bring that down quite a bit. And I'm actually going to copy the hex. And what I'm going to do is I am going to actually use this for the main texture as well by creating a mix RGB node, copying that main hex in, and then I have the perfect gray I want, bringing this into this node, and now you'll see it's going to kind of create an interesting thing going on where now the textures have a bit of unevenness and a bit of interest. But there's a bit too much of the color dispersion for me. Some pieces are too light, some pieces are too dark. So once again, bring in a color ramp node, and we're going to tone this down quite a bit. So first of all, I'm going to hit multiply. I'm going to bring this all the way down to black. I'm going to bring this all the way down to a sort of darker gray than the other one, and or maybe just a bit above, so I can actually go and copy that hex and then bring that color up just a little bit above, so we can actually control where this color is sort of centralizing everything. Let's see, pump that up to 0.8, so it's just a little bit more definitive. And yeah, that actually looks pretty good for the color map. Only problem now is that the texture itself is way too large across the surface. But rather than go in and individually scale each one of these on the UV map like we did for the windows, we're actually going to go in and make our life a lot easier just by adding to this a mapping node and a texture coordinate node. So I have the node wrangler installed, so I can actually add that by selecting the texture and hitting Control T. And I don't do it to all of them at once because you'll actually see what happens. It creates multiple, and we don't really want that. We want one of these texture coordinate and mapping nodes to control all of our image textures. So we'll bring that into there. And let's see, do we have anywhere else? In fact, just to make life a little bit easier. There we go, since we're only using one texture. And we can actually go, I'm used to using normal maps and a bunch of different maps. This only uses one map for everything, bump, roughness, the whole nine. So in this case, I'll just keep one image texture. Might actually speed up my render, I'm not sure, but very well could. So let me switch to this so I can actually see what happens in real time. And let's see. And right there, you can already see that that's having a huge effect, having more refined, tiny details. And yeah, right away, that's already looking a lot better. So let's bring this down to about 2.5 perhaps, maybe a little bit bigger. Actually, I'm pretty happy with that. And once again, I'm going to bring this down quite a bit on the multiply because that just looks far too strong on the color shifting, and bring this color down quite a bit. And so yeah, I think we're coming up on the end here. I might weaken the normal map just a tad bit more, or the height map rather. And yeah, just some subtle, some light, and we'll take a look. Okay, so I believe that's about where I would call it. I, of course, could keep working. I could keep adding details. I could refine this more. But I just really wanted to give you guys a comprehensive look at how you can actually go and make buildings on the fly, and how you could actually do this relatively fast. I was being more instructional here, but you can really, you know, knock one of these out in less than 10 to 20 minutes at a piece when you have enough practice with it. And it becomes a lot more easy to imagine filling up an entire sci-fi city. Rather than working months and months on every little detail, one of these will pass, you know. I mean, you're from a far distance away. You know, if I had a plane below, this will really sell. You know, this will really work for the render, work for everything you need, and you know, it's a pretty good one-off building. So yeah, I think we'll call it there, and I hope you enjoyed this. This has been a Skill on Noodle tutorial. Make sure to like and subscribe if you want more content like this. And let me know if you'd like to see anything more on sci-fi buildings or anything really sci-fi related, hard surface environments, and you know, that sort of thing. I'm going to be making more tutorials in the future about a whole coverage of topics in Blender, but if you want to see more stuff like this, let me know in the comments below and I'll make sure to do that. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.